In the heart of Umuzu Valley, where baobab trees shaded dusty paths and goat bells rang softly like wind chimes, there was a buzz like no other. The wealthiest family in the region, the Odukwe clan, was hosting a wedding that stretched far beyond what any farmer or fisherman had ever seen. The bride, Zara Odukwe, was known not only for her beauty, but for her sharp tongue and her even sharper pride. She had studied abroad, driven luxury cars before she could braid her own hair, and walked like the world owed her its applause. The mansion sparkled under the noonday sun. Guests in Gele and Agbada streamed through the golden gates, and musicians sang praises that danced in the air like butterflies. But not everyone was invited to the celebration. Outside the perimeter wall, among the servants and onlookers, stood a man wrapped in rags, skin darkened by the sun, eyes shaded by age and sorrow. He leaned on a crooked walking stick, his feet bare and calloused. The villagers called him Cato the Wanderer, a beggar who showed up once every few months, always silent, always alone. And on this day, as the wedding bells rang and the scent of jollof rice filled the air, Cato reached out toward the banquet table near the back of the garden. He didn't speak, didn't steal, he simply touched the edge of a tray, eyes sunken with hunger. But before the food could be passed to him, a shrill voice cut the air like a blade. "Who dares touch food meant for royalty?" Zara shouted, stepping down from the wedding stage in her ivory dress and coral beads. The crowd turned. "Is this what you allow now?" she yelled at the guards. "You let animals roam freely into our celebration?" Cato said nothing. His hands trembled. But then Zara marched up, her heels crunching gravel, and without warning, slapped him. Not once, but twice. Gasps flew like birds startled from a tree. The slap echoed louder than the drums. "Next time, stay in the gutters where you belong," she hissed. "Let this teach you your place." People murmured, shocked, some even looking away in shame. The beggar said nothing. He looked at her, his eyes holding a sadness older than the valley itself. Then he turned, slowly, and limped away. No one noticed the man in the gray suit who had been watching from a distance, tall, quiet, eyes like rain-soaked stone. He whispered something to the wedding planner, who stiffened instantly. A single nod. Then he disappeared behind the mansion's pillars. The festivities continued, but an unease lingered like smoke. Zara, now flustered, returned to her groom, Obina, a tech millionaire from the capital, and forced to smile for photos. But deep inside, something shifted. Some said the slap had cursed the day. Others believed the bride had merely shown her true colors. Either way, the wind began to change direction. And the beggar? He did not vanish. He went to a place only a few in Umuzu had ever seen, a quiet grove behind the hills, where wildflowers grew around a large, weathered gate no one dared open. There, he stood beneath the moonlight and whispered, "Tomorrow they will remember." For sometimes the one you throw away is the one who holds the keys. By the next morning, the wedding that was once spoken of with envy had become a river of rumors. The slap, had rippled far beyond the compound walls. Mothers whispered of it at their cassava stalls. Children reenacted it near the riverbank, one playing the beggar, another the angry bride. The name Zara no longer brought only admiration, it brought a question. Did you hear what she did? But inside the Odukwe mansion, the celebration pressed on, at least on the surface. The wine still flowed, the dancers still spun, and the bride kept smiling with her painted lips. But yet, something gnawed beneath her perfect skin. Her husband, Obina, had grown quiet. He no longer held her hand with the same warmth. At dinner, he barely touched his yam porridge, and when Zara asked if everything was all right, he answered with a tired smile that didn't touch his eyes. That night, As the stars blinked like cautious witnesses in the sky, Obina slipped away from the bridal chamber and walked through the estate until he reached a hidden study near the east wing. There, in the silence, stood the man in the gray suit, the same one who had whispered during the wedding. His name was Chief Adigwe, an old family friend, but more importantly, the legal caretaker of the Adukwe estate after Zara's grandfather had mysteriously disappeared a decade ago. "Is it time?" Obina asked. Chief Adigwe sighed. "It's past time. The documents have been sealed long enough." Obina nodded slowly. "And are we certain it's him?" The beggar, Adigwe begged a tired smile. "He's not a beggar, Obina. He's the rightful heir." Obina leaned back in shock. Though he was young and successful, the weight of this revelation fell heavy on his shoulders. "But he was banished. They said he vanished, that he died wandering." Adigwe walked over to a drawer, opened it, and pulled out an old photograph. Faded, bent at the corners, but clear. In the image stood a proud man with kind eyes wearing the same pendant Kato had worn around his neck, one no one had noticed under his rags. "Not vanished," Adigwe said, "erased by those who feared he would rule with humility instead of wealth. Your bride's father among them." Obina clenched his fists. "And now she's humiliated him?" "Yes," the elder said gravely. "In front of the house he built with his own hands." A silence fell between them. Then, Obina asked, "What would you have me do?"
Chief Adigwe looked him in the eye. "You are a man of your own making. But if you wish to live in truth, not luxury, you must stand with the one who was thrown down, even if it means standing against the woman you just married." At dawn, Obina stood in the courtyard as the sun cast golden light over the dew-covered grass. Servants were already bustling. Zara appeared, wrapped in silk, expecting sweet kisses and breakfast trays. Instead, she found her groom speaking with Kato. "Why are you talking to him?" she snapped, her pride flaring like hot oil. But this time, Obina didn't flinch. "Because you slapped a king and thought he was a fly." Zara laughed bitterly. "You're still on about yesterday? He's a beggar. He's your uncle," Chief Adigwe said, stepping forward, "and the rightful owner of this mansion." Zara froze. Her lips parted, then closed. She looked at Kato, truly looked this time. The high cheekbones, the firm jaw, the scar on his hand, echoes of old family portraits flashed in her mind. "This is a joke," she whispered. "It is justice," Kato said, his voice soft, almost forgiving, "for what was stolen, for what was buried." Tears welled in her eyes, not from sorrow, but confusion, the terrifying unraveling of everything she thought she knew. "Why didn't you say something?" she whispered. "Because you wouldn't have listened," he replied, his eyes holding hers like the earth holds a seed. And in that moment, something broke, not just in Zara, but in the household. The house that was built on wealth, but not wisdom. The walls that stood tall but had never welcomed kindness. Zara fell to her knees not out of drama, but because her legs could no longer carry the weight of shame. "I didn't know," she whispered. "But you acted as if you did," Kato replied gently. "And that is the danger of pride." Behind them, the staff had gathered. Cooks, drivers, maids. Some nodded, some wept quietly. They too remembered Kato, not the beggar, but the builder, the man who once gave coins to orphan children and paid workers double during famine seasons. The next morning, the Odukwe mansion was no longer silent. It sang again, not with music, but with murmurs of change. The papers were signed, the house was restored in Mame, and the man once slapped as a stray dog now walked its halls again, not in revenge, but in quiet reclamation. But the story wasn't finished. Because the bride, whose hands once struck in arrogance, now had a choice: to flee or to learn. And sometimes the second path is the harder, but the holier one. The mansion stood quieter now, but not in sadness, in awakening. In the days that followed, the news of the slap and the secret owner swept across the entire province like Harmattan winds, carrying dust and truth. They called it the fall of the proud bride. And yet something deeper stirred beneath the surface. For while people rejoiced at the justice done to Cato, the real story was not over. Justice is easy to witness. Redemption, that takes time and courage. Zara, once the radiant bride whose heels had never touched soil, remained within the mansion's inner quarters. Her mirrors covered, her meals left untouched. She who had been adored now heard whispers behind every door. The girl who had humiliated another man in front of hundreds had been shamed before the world. But more than what people said, it was the silence in her husband's voice that haunted her. Obina had grown distant, not cruel. No, that would have been easier to fight. He was kind, polite, but hollow, like someone waiting for a truth not yet spoken. 3 days after the ceremony turned scandal, Cato sat in the garden with the same crooked staff that had carried him across valleys. This time he was not dressed in rags, but in a clean linen tunic, gifted by one of the gardeners. Yet he remained barefoot. A reminder, not to others, but to himself, that feet must remember where they've walked. Zara approached him slowly, hesitantly, like a child reaching for a burning lantern. She didn't speak first, just stood there, head bowed. "You returned," he said softly without looking up. I never left," she replied, "but I suppose I never truly was here either." Cato nodded, then patted the bench beside him. "Come, speak if you must." She sat, and for the first time in her life, Zara didn't speak to impress, command, or prove. She spoke with her chest hollowed out and her voice trembling. "I was raised to believe we were better," she said, "that poor people were poor because they were lazy, that respect must be earned by what you wear or where you dine. I thought that's how the world worked, that slapping you was justice for stepping where you didn't belong."
He listened. She continued, "But I slapped a man who had built the very house I celebrated in. I humiliated blood. I mocked humility and crowned my ignorance." A silence passed like a slow breeze. "Do you seek forgiveness?" he asked. Zara looked down. "I seek to understand what forgiveness looks like. I've known pride but not peace. I've worn gold, but I've never felt worthy. I want to learn, if I still can." Cato looked at her then. Truly looked. Not as a beggar, not as a king, but as a man. And he saw not the arrogant bride, but a child trying to become a woman. Not by riches, but by repentance. Pride is like a drum. It is loud, it is hollow, and it is beaten by others. But humility, that is a river. It carves stone with time, not noise. Zara wept, not for pity, but for the person she had been, the person she no longer wished to be. From that day forward, the community watched a transformation they had not expected. The woman who once barked at servants now joined them in the market, her feet covered in dust. She cleaned her own room. She helped in the kitchen, learning to peel yams with laughter and awkward grace. The village girls who had once feared her now whispered in awe, not because she wore diamonds, but because she listened to their mothers. And then came the day of reckoning. Chief Adigwe called for a village gathering. Under the great baobab tree all came, elders, children, strangers. Obina stood tall, his arm around Cato, and Zara stood beside them both, no longer in bridal silk, but in a simple Ankara dress, headscarf tied humbly. "I called you here not to expose wounds, but to honor healing." He turned to Cato. "The rightful heir of the Odukwi estate has chosen not to reclaim it for himself, but to offer it back as a home for learning, healing, and growth." Gasps of surprise echoed. "I have walked the roads of rejection," Cato said, stepping forward. "I have eaten from dust and dined with insects. But never once did I forget who I was. Not because of pride, but because the ancestors whispered that I still had a purpose, and perhaps my purpose is not to reign, but to restore." He turned to Zara, who now trembled. "You slapped me once," she nodded, But life slapped you harder, she nodded again, tears flooding her eyes. I forgive you, not because you deserve it, but because we all need someone to show us a different way. Today, I see a new woman, and I am proud of her. The crowd erupted into a murmur of approval, some crying, some clapping softly, and then Cato raised his staff. I gift this house to the people. Let it be a school. Let it be a refuge. Let the next child who is mocked for dreaming remember, the one who begs today may own the land tomorrow. That night, fires were lit, drums were played, and not one servant was left out of the feast. But still, one more chapter remained, because when the sky is clear after a storm, only then do you see the rainbow's full stretch. And Zara, her greatest test was yet to come. 3 months passed, and the mansion once reserved for the Oduqui elite now echoed with laughter from barefoot children learning their first letters. The once guarded gates were wide open, not just to visitors, but to possibility. Where portraits of ancestors once loomed in gold frames, now hung drawings by local orphans, smudged with joy, not pride. The estate had become a sanctuary, a school, and a symbol. But symbols, especially powerful ones, do not live in peace forever. Word traveled beyond the valley. When power shifts, the old order feels its grip loosen, and one man, who once considered the Oduqui mansion his inheritance by birthright, returned to reclaim what he believed had been stolen. His name was Chuka, Zara's uncle, her late father's younger brother.
I've come to reclaim my brother's legacy, Chuka said as he stepped out, eyes scanning the open courtyard that used to glisten with white-tiled pride. This land belongs to me, not to beggars, not to peasants, and not to a woman who's been busy playing farmer's wife. Cato, who had been tending to the school's kitchen garden, walked over with his staff in hand. Chuka, he said calmly, I was silent when I was cast out. Silent when your brother hoarded wealth. Silent when your niece slapped me. But now you find your voice? I find my right, Chuka snapped. You think the village can protect you? You think forgiveness makes you an heir? Zara stepped forward, her voice steady like a drumbeat on a still night. Forgiveness does not make one an heir, she said, but humility builds a kingdom where pride only claims a throne. Chuka laughed, dry and mocking. Spare me your market woman philosophy. But before he could say more, Obina arrived, a file in hand. Here are the estate documents, he said, signed and transferred under the authority of Chief Adigwe, witnessed by village elders, recognized by the courts. One of Chuka's lawyers reached for the file, flipping through furiously, then paused. It's legal, he muttered. Completely legal. Chuka turned red with fury. This is betrayal. No, Cato replied gently. This is what healing looks like. It is not loud. It is not cruel. It simply no longer needs your permission. Chuka's face contorted. You'll regret this, all of you. But the people had already gathered. The same workers he had ignored for years. The same widows he'd once refused alms. Now they stood shoulder to shoulder, not in anger, but in unity. And Chuka saw something that frightened him more than the law. He saw respect, not for him, but for the man he had tried to erase. He left that evening without another word. Later, as the sun fell behind the hills and the lanterns flickered across the fields, Zara sat beside Cato under the baobab tree. The wind was gentle, carrying the smell of firewood and roasted maize. "Do you think people ever truly change?" she asked. He smiled. "The soil does not complain when you plant a new seed. It simply waits to see if it will grow." She nodded, letting his words rest in her chest like a soft stone.
You know, she added, if someone had told me that my life would go from diamonds to dirt, I would have laughed. And now? He asked. Now I know dirt is where life begins, Kato chuckled. A proverb worthy of elders. Obina joined them then, wrapping a shawl around Zara's shoulders. No words were needed. The silence between them was no longer heavy. It was shared, like bread, like peace. That night a celebration was held, not for a wedding, not for a victory, but for harvest. The children performed plays, elders told riddles. The moon above watched it all like a grandmother smiling down. And in the final hours, Kato took the stage. I came back not to be a king, he said, but to remind you all that dignity cannot be dressed in gold. It must be lived. And the most powerful people are not those who own mansions, but those who open them. The crowd stood in thunderous applause, some in tears, some smiling. As the night faded, a young girl whispered to her friend, "Did you hear? That bride who slapped the beggar is now building schools." Her friend replied, "Because the beggar wasn't just a man, he was a mirror."